The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of IRONCLAD, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
We cut through the partisan talking points. We're not interested in perpetuating fear. We're interested in seeking truth, hearing what's really going on America's borderland. Welcome to Borderland, an IRONCLAD original. I am your host, Vincent Rocco Vargas. I served 7 years with the United States Border Patrol. A portion of that was with the Special Operations Units. I was a BORSTAR agent, which is a search, trauma, and rescue medic. At one point, I was attached to BORTAC while we served high-risk warrants, and we were involved in missions to disrupt drug trafficking organizations. I'm an author of a book named Borderland, and my efforts and my goal for that book was to enlighten people on the career field of the Border Patrol. We cannot continue to have this conversation of the border, the crisis in immigration, if we do not understand the foundation of what some of these jobs entail. My goal was to enlighten people on what the Border Patrol career field was. In this episode, we're going to hear different perspectives and viewpoints on Texas Operation Lone Star, a controversial campaign launched by Texas Governor Greg Abbott in 2021 that essentially empowers state law enforcement operations like Texas Department of Public Safety, the Texas Military Department, and the National Guard to counter illegal immigration, human trafficking, and drug trade. Certain tactics used in this operation, like the use of barbed wire and the treatment of some migrants, have drawn criticism from some humanitarian groups and the federal government, while garnering praise from some in the law enforcement community. Today, we present multiple perspectives on the issue. First up, we hear from Terrell County's Texas Sheriff Thaddeus Cleveland. Thaddeus Cleveland was an Air Force veteran who spent 26 years with the U.S. Border Patrol, and since retiring, he has served as the Sheriff of Terrell County. He has perspective from the horse's mouth, if you will. He lives in a border town, he grew up in a border town, and he protects a border town. And some of the issues that he sees currently and the changes from his beginning of his career till now might shock you.
You know, the Border Patrol is going to be 100 years old this year, May 28th. And 100 years of progress along this U.S.-Mexico border is what we've done. And no, we haven't done it all alone. We've had partnerships and with whether it's state and local agencies, right? But 100 years of progress, and this administration came in and within about 6 months completely wrecked all of that. And with that, now what they're trying to wreck and dismantle, they're trying to dismantle those partnerships. They're trying to pit the Border Patrol against the state forces. And I can tell you at that ground level, the amount of coordination, the amount of collaboration still goes on that'll make you happy and know that the troops on the ground, they're doing the real work. It's where the rubber really hits the road.
No, I love that. Yes, I'll just say that. I absolutely agree. Governor Abbott's decision to activate his troops down the border is the state's right to do so. And I think people think it is an act of rebellion, but more so it is his choice to protect his state in his manner. Nothing he's done, I personally believe, is overreach. There is concerns about from outside, not personally me, just I do see the talks and the concerns about different aspects, the razor wire, the water floats, the things to deterrence that potentially have caused more harm. I would love to hear your opinion on that.
It's a great point and great question. And to be honest, I'd like to see him do a little bit more or a lot more, to be honest, because we're focused, of course, at the epicenter in Texas right now, which is Eagle Pass or has been. We've seen spike ups over in El Paso, and that'll continue to happen. But first, to the floating buoys out there, there's it's a very small portion of the river, but it was a portion of the river that was being utilized pretty heavily. So they put those there and stopped those crossings in that area, and that was their goal, right? But I can remember you had Joaquin Castro, he's a Democratic congressman out of San Antonio. You had Jackson Lee out of Houston. She's very vocal. And then you had another one by Sylvia Garcia out of Houston. These three senators or congresspeople came down to really bash Governor Abbott. And it was, again, kind of comical because those are the two areas, San Antonio and Houston, where the vast majority of those people are being funneled to.
Absolutely.
And of course, Houston being the trafficking capital of the world. So that part of it, and then the media got involved, and then the administration wanted to say, well, these buoys are killing, precious shells in the water. Well, so to counter that, and we've got a crossing here called Paso Colorado, historical crossing back from like most crossings when Indians used to come back and forth, right? But I can go out there, and no one can get out there. It's a very remote piece of the border. But I went out there and saw some dead, some shells in the water, and took a picture and made a Facebook post on it. How it's not the buoys that are killing it; it's the people, whether it's the trash and the bodily fluids and everything else that's being contaminated in parts of our rivers and whatnot. But the razor wire, no, it's just like a border wall. It's a deterrent, or it's serving as a deterrent. But it's not, strung all up and down the river here in Texas, the Rio Grande River. It's in certain areas where we've seen a high number of crossings, and they're wanting to shut those numbers down or shut those crossings down and funnel that activity like we do with walls to other locations. So I was going to say, I'm proud of what the governor's done, not only in that sense, but also through Operation Lone Star funding, because that has directly impacted my office. Again, the county can only afford to hire myself and 2 other deputies for 2,300 square miles. Again, the 10th largest county in Texas. We're a poor county. I drive the worst vehicles because I've always been one of those people. I didn't think because I was patrol agent charge, I had to have the nicest. I've never been like that. And I'm probably the worst on vehicles too. But through his funding, it's been able to hire more deputies, buy some new vehicles, and things of that nature.
Right. Well, I'll add to that. I did go out and see the buoys. I personally went out to go check them out myself. And what, again, I find frustrating is people using a false narrative to create an emotional response. It's unfair for people to do that because most of the nation doesn't have access to visually see these things and put their hands on them. There's a portion of those buoys that has what looks like to the rudimentary eye would be a saw type of band. When you actually go to it, it is another form of deterrence. It isn't something that can cut you unless you genuinely force the cut. It is more so an appearance that looks intimidating, but no, it is not the saw that people were making it out to be, which I find unfair that politically people use these buttons and this emotional draw. And this is both sides of the spectrum. The left and the right both do this. And this is what I'm trying to get down to the bottom of, let's stop doing that. Let's get honest with ourselves. Okay. And understanding why they use it. Now, whether you agree to a buoy being used or not is one thing. That's everyone's opinion. We can say, I don't like it or I do like it. Okay. Has it caused deaths? Yes. But anytime illegals cross that river, they are risking their lives. And so at any point, whether it be a buoy or razor wire or just a loose rock on the floor that they misstep, someone coming across that river can lose their life. And they know that. They know the risk that they're taking. And so it's important for us to say that piece, and it's important for me to mention that for those who are listening, because everyone wants to jump, like I said, at these emotional points. And I'd rather be the person to say that is false. That is an emotional point. That is not true. Right. And so we can hopefully get past that. And then the discussion becomes whether you agree with it or not. Well, that's an opinion. And that's fine. But it does help in the deterrence of migration, of illegal migration, because it makes trafficking organizations or even migrants themselves choose a different path. And it's the same use of what a fence would be, or what a wall would be, or what camera operators would be. All those are forms of deterrence or high-vis location for agents. All those are areas of deterrence so that you see that you will be apprehended. But currently, Sheriff, they don't care about being apprehended. There's a different position here. When I was in, it was a chase. Sign of 5. Let's go. Let's beat the ground. We start tracking. 5 miles down, 10 miles down. They're still going. 20 miles down. Shift change. And then you're trying to get to that's a different type of work that we don't see as much currently. What we see now is crossing the border and giving up.
And that was my point earlier. That's what we have here in Terrell County. People that want to enter undetected. When you encounter them, they still run. When I counter them on the highway, every one of them turns into a pursuit. They won't pull over and then ends up in a bailout or spiking. Or I've shot out 3 tires with a shotgun. You can do that as a sheriff as well. And I don't say that to brag. I want to make sure my citizens are protected. So if we can typically play out how we're going to pull a vehicle over and do it in the smartest way. But there have been a few times when something's run to town and I'll take it out with a shotgun just to disable it.
Oh, absolutely. People don't know the threats that can happen. Lose control near a school, lose control near, the people of the city. If you find them in a rural area and it's safer to make that decision, then so be it. So I love that.
I've had the time of my life. I tell you, these last 2 years have been very comparable to my first 2 years in Nogales, Arizona. And my kids even say, gosh, Dad, and I've got great kids, but they said, don't you feel bad about saying you're having the time of your life because I'm out catching illegal aliens, and they've lived around it their whole life. But it's not that I'm enjoying. I'm going to protect my border. We talked earlier. That's my job. I'm still a human. And I think that's when I had kids of my own, I think I look back to when I was a young agent catching people. It was just another day, catch a dope load. That was the fun stuff, right? But as I've gotten older and had kids and I'm watching people cross, it pulls on your heart, man. We're blessed.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say that, Sheriff. I was just curious, and this isn't a gotcha question. This is a genuine man-to-man. Is there moments where you apprehend a family and say, dang, I feel bad?
It doesn't even have to be a family, and I wouldn't say that I feel bad about apprehending them. We see the poorest of the poor, man. I mean, even those that aren't poor, they want to come to America. The ones we encounter out here are coming to work. They've got a job. And I have great conversations. I mean, middle-aged men that are just, where are you from? Guerrero, what part? Acapulco, of all places. I'm like, why do you want to leave Acapulco? Yeah. That's where Americans want to go. But no, man, it's just, it is sad. The youngest we've had to recover deceased here was a 15-year-old boy. And it was actually a murder. I'd been a sheriff for a month and I'm going, how the heck does this happen? I don't even know what I'm doing yet. And it's, for me, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have crime here. It's all been border security and I'm still being an extension of my border patrol arm. But no, we had a case where a mother was crossing with her 2 kids and another portion of a group. And the son was, a big boy. He was I'm 6'1". He was close to my size, probably a little heavier, 15 years old. And he's already started to succumb to some heat exhaustion and just kind of losing his mind and, just being kind of combative. And the smugglers tied his hands together so he couldn't, flail his arms around. And as time goes on, he's still being very obnoxious. So they tell the mom, tell you what, you're going to have to do something with your son, get a rock, hit him in the back of the head. It won't kill him. It'll just knock him out.
No way.
And either you're going to do it or we're going to do it. So, he started acting up again. So she hit him on the head a couple of times. It didn't kill him. But he was tied in the front. They were laid on top of him on the ground and he died of asphyxiation. The sad part was his 9-year-old brother that was in the group too. Mom told him to lay on the legs, but it wasn't that she did it, out of malice. I really felt for her, man. I tell you what, and she's since been acquitted. I truly believe in that. She suffered enough, but it's either she did it her way or the cartel was going to do it. The smugglers. Just a horrible.
There's so many of those stories that, the heartless would say, well, then don't come across. But those who are in that moment, those who feel so compelled to risk everything to come to America, they don't think about that stuff. They want the chance to have opportunity, what we have, the gift that we've been born with, right? And I find it fascinating that a lot of Americans who live in this country who don't show their gratitude to that fact, they've forgotten how fortunate we are. Even if they're lower income, middle class, it doesn't matter. If you're an American citizen, you have an opportunity to do what you want with that. And millions are willing to risk their lives daily. What that mother would do just to try and protect her son, she had to harm her own son. And inadvertently, he lost his life. Wow.
Yes, horrible tragedy. Even with that being said, on I've had the opportunity to go to speak at various events, and I'd love, of course, I get invited by more of the conservative groups, more of the conservative media, but I'd love to have the opportunity because my story is not going to change. Meaning, I'm not going to build the story one way to
please one crowd,
a certain group of people. I'm just going to tell the truth, man, and what it is. It's a solvable problem. It's going to take both sides, and really both sides have contributed to where we are. Yes, this administration and right now is doing absolutely nothing. And as I mentioned, the other administrations built up border security, but Republicans and Democrats are really together to blame in a lot of this. It's not just,
I've tried to explain to people that the answer is actually both sides of the party's argument, but somewhere in the middle of that. You have one 100%. Side who wants an open border. You have one side who wants a closed border because of Homeland Security. And it's more in the middle. If you do too much Homeland Security, well, then we're almost North Korea, right? We can't have too much lockdown because we lose freedom, right? And then the other side of it, if you have too much open door policy for immigration, well, then we don't even have a country at that point. So it's in the middle. We have to always have strong Homeland Security foundation because we the people deserve to be safe in our own country, right? And then the other side of it, we are a country of dignity and rooted off of immigration. And so we should allow legal immigration. And so we should look further into why is it so challenging and how can we almost streamline that process for those who really show up here with the gratitude of America and want to invest back into this great nation.
I said, man, we need to fill Congress with a bunch of vets and law enforcement and Border Patrol, man, and we can figure this stuff out quickly.
Next, to broaden the perspective of the conversation, we bring in JJ Mulligan Sepulveda, who is an author of the book, No Human is Illegal. He is also an attorney who focuses on immigration law. This gentleman has a perspective of someone who's working the front lines with migrants who are coming into this country illegally, and he's seeing it from an angle that only he would understand. And so here's his perspective. And I find him to be, again, a well-balanced perspective from his angle. And I think it's important for all of us to hear that. I'm curious from your position and you're watching the news, Operation Lone Star.
I think that whoever's in power, the states are sort of the ones that are able to sort of advocate against what they see as wrong. And under the Trump administration, it was California and New York that were, litigating and doing a lot of these big changes in policy that they didn't think the federal government was doing the right thing. And it seems like Texas has sort of taken that upon them. The Supreme Court has always said that immigration is specifically in the purview of the federal government because the president is the executive branch. They are solely in charge of dealing with the international powers. And immigration is solely international, right? It's by definition, what's international is through immigration. So you're messing with international policy is what the Supreme Court has always said on the issue. Whether I think a state can engage in that, I don't know. It's sort of the flip side of the coin of the sanctuary cities, and states have sort of taken it upon themselves to go against what the federal government is doing, depending on which side's in power. And if it's the Republicans, it's the more liberal states. If it's the Democrats, it's the more conservative states that are sort of going against what's happening.
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy on the implementation of razor wire and those buoys because, they, from the news perspective, they've caused death. But I think, from my perspective, anyone entering illegally, they risk that. There's a lot more drownings than anything. But, I understand it seems like harsh. Some of the pictures are taken out of context personally because I know the area. I used to work that area. But using things like Connex boxes and barbed wire and the buoys from your position as an immigration lawyer, is that considered more like a harsh punishment? Do you understand why they use it as deterrence, or how do you just personally feel about that kind of form of deterrence?
I don't agree with it personally, because I don't think, you've seen some of the individuals that either they can't swim or they're too young or all these things. You're just unnecessarily risking human lives. I think the idea in a lot of U.S. citizens' minds that have not had to, sacrifice a whole lot or have not gone through that decision, that you'll eventually stop someone if you make it hard enough. And my experience with my clients is, no, they'll go through a fucking wall if they have to, literally. And so whatever you put in front of them, you're just going to kill people, unfortunately. And so if that's what Governor Abbott and Texans think is the best thing, then I don't agree with that, because I think deterrence, when you're looking at death in your own country, you'd rather risk it to try and enter and to be safe.
I recently had the opportunity to be a guest on another Ironclad original, Change Agents with Andy Stumpf, where we actually started to talk about Operation Lone Star and some of the reactions to it. And I wanted to bring you in on a portion of this conversation because I felt it was relevant to the topic of the show. Here's the clip. I think a lot of America thinks that we should be pushing them back with shields and skip back. But that's not the nature of the job.
It's worse than that, man. One of the things that concerns me, and again, I take what I see on the internet with a grain of salt, because I do believe the internet should come with an IQ test associated. Like, if you're dumb, you get dial-up, and if you're Elon Musk, you can have some Cat 5 cable. I have seen so many people outwardly expressing that what they want the National Guard to do is shoot people as they start making their way across the border. And I worry about how they arrive at that place. Are they believing everything that they hear about the border, that we're being invaded every day by military age males? And not that that's not happening. And if you think about it, though, a military age male, let's call that something between, we'll call it 15 to, even though 15's on the young end of that, but somebody who could be confused for a later teen into their, call it 30 on the top end. Well, those are the people that have the ability in their life to be the most physical to try to attempt these border crossings. It doesn't mean that all of them are ISIS infiltrators or, Chinese communists that are trying to infiltrate. And again, not saying that couldn't be that, but for somebody to think that the policy for the National Guard should be to stand at the border on top of Humvees with M4s and gun people down as they cross the center line of the Rio Grande, I'm really worried what that means. Like, is that who we are? Like, is that who we stand for? It concerns me.
That's exactly. That comment right there is exactly. I think there's very few that see it that way. And I think it's important to see it that way. It's like, is that the type of person we are? Is that the type of country we are? To engage on someone attempting to come into this country. You don't know. I don't have a chance to interview them, but attempting to come into this country to gain more opportunity, to gain, to gain access to this country. It's a hard thing to say, but the last thing would ever say is to set up a high point and take aim. That's fucking barbaric. And the funny thing is, the people who say that, the majority of those people, we've been at war for almost 20 something years. The majority of them have never even attempted to serve in that capacity. But then now you want to mention something on social media because you have the ability to do that without having to actually act on it. But that's what you want us to do. You want the guys who've served this country, who've done so many things overseas, who've been asked to do the unspeakables, to come to this great nation, back onto our own soil, and defend us in that capacity. This subject is hard. This subject is challenging. For me to even sit here and try and voice this, fucking hard.
Yeah.
But that, to say we should go to shooting them, there's a disconnect for that individual to understand, like, yeah, you don't get it. You don't get this still.
Well, and it begs an even deeper question, to me at least, using the term that you just used, which I love, is the disconnect with this interconnectivity that we have. And for clarity, I don't see people doing a Zoom call or like an Instagram live being like, shoot these fuckers, right? They want to do they don't want to necessarily associate the comment with them directly. They would rather kind of do it anonymously or put it out there on the internet. And I wonder, is it even actually how they feel, or have we become so desensitized to the way that we interact on these devices that it actually entices us to be the worst version of ourselves, who we would not actually be in person? So then the things that we're seeing and hearing on the digital world that we're connected in are not potentially even a reflection of who we really are as people. You know what I mean? Like it's this
Yeah,
soup.
it's the
that you're trying to see
metaverse version. That's you can say those things and have no repercussions of it.
Yeah, because I don't even know if that person actually feels that way, or do they just want to rise because their whole social interaction is online. You know, like social media is neither, in my opinion, very social because it's the worst expression for most people, and it's certainly not even necessarily media, even though I guess it could be, but it's neither of those things. Is it just they choose to be like that because they want to rise to the top and get noticed because that's where they get their social engagement from, even though in real life they probably wouldn't be like that? Like,
yeah,
we're so fucked as a species. Like, again, I can't even half the time articulate why I feel the way that I feel, let alone trying to understand why somebody else feels the way that they feel on the internet and if that's their real person in real life.
Finally, we hear from Yuma County, Arizona, Sheriff Leon Wilmot. And Sheriff Wilmot is someone who has a wealth of knowledge doing this job for 40 years, who is also a Marine Corps veteran. He found his way into Yuma and had made it his home. He mentioned things in this interview that would shock you, things that in my career I never heard of. This gentleman, when you would think that he might have a perspective that we would all think a sheriff in Arizona might have, it's quite the opposite. You guys enjoy. Well, let's get into the whole border situation. So when you first were working on the border, 20 odd years ago, or so, what's the difference in traffic that you saw then when it comes to illegal immigration and drug trafficking to what you see now?
Back when I first started, it was the only fencing we had was 3-strand barbed wire that covered all of our border down there east of San Luis. You did have the old landing mat fencing down by the city of San Luis, which was put up, and that was pretty much it. But back then, we didn't see a whole lot of what we're seeing now. And you're not seeing the cartel exploitation back then like we're seeing now as well. So it's all about money for the cartels. What we did encounter was the cartels starting to steal tractors from our farmers and drive them into Mexico. You had that criminal element from the transnational criminal organizations that were coming over, stealing cars, taking them into Mexico, retrofitting them to help smuggle narcotics into the U.S. When you didn't have any infrastructure out in the eastern desert along the Barium Goldwater Range, we were recovering stolen vehicles that had been stuck out there. They were burned to the ground by the cartels and the smugglers. And that's when we started to see an increase in that activity back then it was marijuana. It was a real big thing. And what was really a concern for us was the fact that the U.S. attorneys were not charging these individuals for smuggling narcotics. So Border Patrol agents were just, as a result, were only able to seize the narcotics and then turn them back. That's way back when that they were dealing with this. They would just seize the narcotics and then send them back across the border, voluntary return, because the U.S. attorney wouldn't charge them. And that was back under Sheriff Ralph Ogden when I worked under him. So, and what we did is the sheriff, and I continue it to this day, we cross-deputized federal officers from Border Patrol, so that if the U.S. attorney wouldn't charge these individuals for smuggling narcotics, then they could charge them through the state process, acting under the color and authority of the sheriff. This way, there was 100% consequence delivery. Each and every one of those individuals that were arrested received at least a minimum sentence of 2.5 years in prison. That word got out, and it slowed down the narcotics smuggling in Yuma County. So that was the first thing that we did. We also had to find grant monies to actually buy gates to put up along the farm fields and the canals to prevent the cartels from stealing the farm tractors, because the insurance companies were basically letting our farmers know that we can't keep paying you for all these stolen tractors. We're going to have to drop you in your insurance. We couldn't have that happen, not in this community. So that's why we ended up paying for the fences and the gates, and then the Bureau of Reclamation installed them for us. So that's the kind of partnerships and working together. And we were dealing with I don't know if you've ever heard of a tree.
No.
Okay, so the smugglers of humans would basically along our river corridor, because there was so much non-indigenous plant life, you could conceal yourself easily in this brush along the river corridor. So you couldn't see them. And we were advised by some individuals that there was a rape tree, which we didn't know back then what that was either. So the smugglers would bring across a group after they paid into the U.S. down there along our river corridor. And when they did reach into the U.S., then the smugglers would actually rape the women. And then would hang their clothing on this tree.
Oh, my God.
And when we found out about that, we got with our Border Patrol partners, and we went down there and we took that tree down. And the second thing was the Border Patrol was able to get funding so we could go down there and get rid of all that non-indigenous plant life that was down along the Colorado River, to cut all that ability for the criminal element to be raping these women and children down there on the border and then hanging their panties and bras on this tree. That was when we started experiencing a lot of the cartel stuff. So on that's on the Baja California side. We have the Sinaloa cartel on their southern part, south of San Luis. And we all know who that is, El Chapo Guzman and his sons that run that. So that's where the partnerships came into place. We've dealt with the robberies, the homicides. We just had a homicide suspect in custody that was a smuggler that had a disagreement with the smuggler that he was bringing up. Ended up that guy went off a cliff, died. Working with Border Patrol, we were tracked down the suspect. He just got 10.5 years in prison for that. So unfortunately, when this stuff happens, the local law enforcement are the ones that are tasked with dealing with all these crimes that you see. It's not Border Patrol that deals with them. It's not ICE. It's not anybody else but the locals. So we started seeing an increase in deaths in the desert, and individuals were being left by the smugglers out in the desert because they told them, you only have a day or two. You don't need much water. And they would leave the groups abandoned out in the desert. So we have to deal with those deaths as well.
When you see what Texas is doing with Operation Lone Star, you've seen what they've done with the barbed wire, with the buoys, and also taking control of a park down in Eagle Pass, Texas. Is that something that you would love to see your own state kind of take part in protecting its own borders? Or how does that even personally, when you see that, how does that make you feel?
Well, here's what we had to do, because Mayorkas actually came down to Yuma, met with our farmers and all that stuff. We showed him the gaps in the fencing that needed to be done. He promised us he would get that fixed. He didn't, and it started impacting our farmers, okay, coming across the river corridor. There were large gaps that were wide open, and the individuals were coming across illegally, defecating in the farm fields, leaving their trash and litter all over the river, including medicinals, stuff that we were picking up that we have no clue what it was, medicines. And all this was being dumped on the river. It was right during the agricultural season where people were coming in to work, but it was impacting our farmers to the point where we asked the governor back then, Ducey, we need help. And that's why the containers were put up in Yuma County originally. And then you've seen the politics about that. Nobody cared about the fact that we asked for that because it was impacting farmers and food and health safety. So that wasn't the narrative that mainstream media was putting out there on the reality of what we were doing.
What containers are you talking about?
Shipping containers.
And you were using those?
So we actually, just like you're seeing in Texas, we actually put up shipping containers down here. The state did. And that helped. That curbed it. We, as a county, had to pay, I think we're still paying $70,000 a year out of general fund money for porta-johns down on the border, because the federal government's not putting porta-johns down there for individuals to utilize while they're standing there waiting for Border Patrol to come pick them up.
And why is that important to have porta-johns there for them?
because otherwise they're going to go out into the farm fields and defecate in the farm fields or somebody's property.
And
so that's why we had to do that.
Right,
It's a food safety issue,
right?
Because if they defecate in a farm field, that farmer cannot harvest that portion of the crop. So you're talking celery, cabbage, you name it. If it's a leafy green, we grow it in Yuma County. So that farmer can't harvest that crop. That's the impact to them. And it's a food safety issue, as well as an environmental issue too, when you're doing this down along the river. You don't want that in the river either. So we actually had containers, then we had a change in administration and they pulled the containers out.
Really? Why was that? What was their reason for doing that?
Well, because the federal government was suing the state again for putting this up. We have a different dynamic here geographically because a lot of our border, probably 90% of it, is federal land. So it's Bureau of Reclamation, it's BLM, it's military reservation, or it's tribal land. So the state isn't able to go on federal land and do that type of activity. Texas, on the other hand, I don't think they have any federal land. I think it's all private land. So they're able to do what they're doing, whereas we in Yuma County are not. Now, Cochise County, who's experiencing another side of this problem, is actually dealing with the repercussions of them pulling the containers out.
What is that?
Because of cartels.
What is the repercussion of that?
So Cochise County has a major issue right now with cartels recruiting kids on these social networks like TikTok and all these other things, which I'm not totally spooled up on. But they're using social media to recruit individuals and kids to go down to the border in Cochise County. And that's Mark Daniels. If you haven't had a chance to talk to him, he can really educate you on some serious issues he's got down there. Sheriffs from out Arizona have actually sent deputies down there to help him because they're going down there to pick up groups that the cartels recruited at $500 to $1,000 per person to pick up to take into Tucson or Phoenix.
Wow.
So they can get these, and these are the getaways. Okay. So they're doing this every day. And what they tell these individuals to do is if law enforcement catches you, you need to run. He's running, I think, almost 10 pursuits per day.
Wow.
On individuals coming into his county to pick these individuals up at $500 to $1,000 apiece and smuggle them into the interior of the U.S. to Phoenix or Tucson so they can get to the next destination.
And those are failure to yields, right? And so when a police officer goes to pull anyone over, those who are listening, watching, and they refuse to stop for the law enforcement, that's a chase, and it's called a failure to yield. And those usually end up pretty catastrophic. They could end up from innocent people getting tied into the middle of it by a car accident. They could go off the side of the road and lose control. It's a lot of different ways that can turn out. It's never good, but those are happening more and more from other interviews, more and more throughout the border.
And it's really flagrant down there in his county. And some of them tell them, so why do you pursue? Well, if we didn't, they're still killing my people because they're told once you pick them up, you need to get to the interstate. You're talking 30, 40 miles for him, for that individual, to get from the border up to I-10.
Yeah.
So, and they're told as soon as you pick them up, you need to haul, you know what, up to the interstate and get them out of there. Well, ends up these people were flying through Sierra Vista and Douglas and different areas in his county, and they were ended up in collisions and killing people. So they don't have much of a choice. They need to stop this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's why other sheriffs, because he doesn't have all the deputies in the world, neither do I, to cover all the gaps in this border. The other sheriffs were actually sending their deputies down there in Arizona to help him try to put this to a stop through the education to the community over social media networks, the media. But he's ended up, it's cost him, I think his last number was over $8 million this last year.
Wow.
On individuals that with border related crimes down in just his county.
When you mentioned earlier, there was a group of sheriffs on the border towns, and you guys had a 16-point plan on how to that they can help with. Is that a public information, that 16-point plan that you guys created?
Yeah. Yeah, I could probably send it to you.
I would love to have that document that we could probably put onto the link. So if someone wanted to read up on it, what are some of the other sheriffs, if you don't mind sharing, that were a part of that wanting to kind of support and help with some of the border crisis?
So we had the executive directors for Western states. We had the executive director for national sheriffs, and we had our executive director, Clint, from Southwestern Border Sheriffs Coalition. And the majority of the folks that were at this meeting were from the Southwestern Border Sheriffs Coalition that met with Mayorkas personally. And that we held that meeting in El Paso, Texas.
Oh, so, good old El Paso.
Yep, El Paso. So, yeah, that 16-point plan's there. In fact, if you go to national sheriffs, it might be on there. But because they were there with us and we helped draft all that together as a team, There's 31 border sheriffs. We meet all the time. We call back and forth. I was talking with Joe Frank Martinez out of Val Verde, Texas, because me and him are kind of dealing with the same scenarios with the large influx and how it's impacting our communities. I will tell you that if it wasn't for our NGOs here and us all working together, it'd be a serious impact to our community. But our community doesn't even see what's going on because of what we put into place. So it hasn't impacted, for the most part, their daily lives. And that's the whole goal.
Thank you for listening to Borderland and Ironclad Original. You know, when we see everyone's perspectives, I hope that it not only educates you, but it shows you that people see this from different angles based on their perspectives of how they see the world, but also how they engage in the crisis. I think the only way we move the needle in this conversation is continue to have this kind of discussion. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next week.